Um, Hi, everybody. I think we're now live. I can see a live button. So I'm hopeful that people are going to be joining us over the next few minutes to join us on our latest LinkedIn Live, where we are going to be exploring kind of mental health, mental well-being, and having a bit of a deep dive into resilience specifically. So we were sort of mindful, particularly for those of you that are perhaps UK based or Europe based, that September feels a bit like almost one of those periods in the year where we sort of have children maybe going back to school, we take stock, there's a bit of a push until the kind of end of the calendar year. And it felt like a really nice time to have a think about not just what we can do as individuals around our own mental health and well-being, but also for those of us that might be in charge of that for their organisations, how we can think about that for our teams or for our companies. So my name's Lucy, I'm the Inclusion Director at SHL. And before we kind of really get started today, we wanted to kick off with a bit of a question for all of you joining. And I'm hoping Azra will pop up a QR code for us all just to see how everybody is feeling at the moment. So I think shortly you should see a QR code on your screen, which will take you to Mentimeter. We just want to see a bit of a word cloud around, how are you feeling? Now, I know if I'd have been asked this question at kind of 8:30 this morning, as I was getting 2 kids ready for school out the day, needed to be back home ready for my 9 o'clock meeting, my words would have definitely been stressed, maybe a bit harassed, but just really like to know how you are feeling today. So if you can either scan that QR code or go to menti.com and enter the code on the screen, you should come up with a little free text box for you to answer that question. And whilst you're doing that, let me just introduce Kate, who is going to be joining me for this session today. So Kate is an award-winning independent occupational therapist based in Leicester here in the UK. She's got a background in mental health services, working for the NHS. She's also been a lecturer in higher education, and is really passionate about raising awareness of mental health issues in the community, in workplaces. She's a mental health first aid approved training instructor. So she trains us all on how to become mental health first aiders. And she's also owns her own business, Wellbeing Therapy Solutions, and they offer mental health focused occupational therapy to children, young people and adults, as well as mental health and wellbeing courses for businesses, workplaces, and other organisations, as that's how Kate and I first got to know each other. She came and delivered an excellent session to a team that I was in. So I'm really excited, Kate, to get your insight today. And I can see lots of you joining in on this word cloud here. And I feel like some of you are perhaps here for some of that insight as well. We've got a bit of a mix, but busy is probably one of the biggest words. I can see stressed, under pressure. I can also see happy, sun-seeking. Yeah, I think I'm with whoever is sun-seeking. We've also got distracted, focused. So I'm hoping that by the end of this kind of next 40 minutes or so, that we will leave you all with some really kind of tangible strategies, both as individuals, but also organisations, to help you tackle perhaps some of those feelings. Do stick around to the end, because we're going to be finishing with some mindfulness. So hopefully that will leave you feeling quite energised and refocused for whatever your next meeting of the day is, and also give you a little something that you can take away and do in other scenarios as well. I'm going to start asking Kate some questions in a moment, but we'd really like to see some questions from you as well. So please do pop them in the comments. We will make sure we leave some time for those at the end. So as we're talking, if you think you'd like to hear more about something, please do ask questions, because we want this to be a little bit interactive as well. And thank you all for your honesty on the response on the word cloud there. Okay, so Kate, when we were sort of chatting about this topic, both you and I were reflecting on, I think, just how much the focus on mental health and well-being has changed over the last few years. I think, dare I say, the P word, the pandemic, really sort of shifted mental health a lot into the spotlight. And I've definitely seen, another shift now as people are navigating things like hybrid working, returning back to normal, whatever that could be. And I know you've worked with lots of different organisations, so I'd love to see what you've seen change over the last 2 to 3 years in terms of kind of both individuals and organisations when it comes to a focus on mental health and well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I can really reflect back some of the things that you've been saying there, Lucy. From my experience over the past few years, really, is a really significant shift in many organisations on mental health and well-being, particularly of staff, of teams, of colleagues, and that genuineness around awareness of people's mental health, well-being, and then I guess an openness to feel that importance within the workplace setting, but also I think one of the shifts has been that not only it's that kind of openness and encouraging people to talk and share in some workplaces, but thinking about how workplaces can best support their teams, their colleagues, to be as well as they can. And I think for me, the thing I've noticed most is that rise in considering things like compassionate leadership styles. I think that's been a shift. And organisations wanting to explore and enhance workplace culture, which for me is huge in this space. It's really important to address workplace culture and to offer environments that are genuinely more inclusive, where people feel like they can bring their whole selves to work and feel supported in that, and that there is support available for their own mental health and well-being. And I was, as I was prepping, to kind of talk to you today, I was interested in, I'd been reading the CIPD report on mental health at work. And actually that shows that almost half of all organisations are now taking a strategic approach to mental health and well-being, which is great. It's not just on the agenda, there's actually a strategy around it. And for me, that's one of the biggest changes I've seen. I work particularly with small and medium-sized businesses, and that's what I'm noticing there.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because if I think, back when I joined the workplace kind of, nearly 15 years ago now, it just wasn't talked about at all or really considered. There was sort of this, and you mentioned there, people feeling comfortable to be their true selves at work, but there was almost this expectation that you came to work to do your job, whatever else was going on outside of work, that was completely separate to work. And it's interesting when I talk to my parents about how that's changing, and even some of the things that are available in terms of support programs and counselling and therapy and things like that through employee benefits. And it's all, sounds really good, but I think there's still further to go as well. So it's just, very interesting to see how things have shifted over time.
Yeah, I think as a society, we are more informed, we are becoming more educated, and the more that we can be, then that's where these shifts will really happen. I can really relate to that. When I joined the workforce in the NHS, I didn't even consider that, how I was feeling or life outside or the different things that could affect me were relevant at work. That I had to have my professional head on, and professional meant separating those things. And actually, we learn and we grow. And I know that it's not unprofessional to be considering the different things. Actually, for me, it's a really important part of professionalism to be self-aware, but then also to feel like you can be supported, because there may be work-related things that you need some help with. But as we know, work and life aren't separate; they're all together, and we need to consider the whole person.
Exactly. And I think your kind of point around that sort of compassionate leadership style changing as well, and the importance of empathy, particularly amongst leaders, is really important. And I just wonder, we might have, hopefully we have got a few different leaders kind of joining us on this session. what would your sort of advice be around how do you explore and show empathy to your colleagues and to your teams?
Yeah. So I think there has to be a genuineness to want to demonstrate. That's where empathy comes from. It's that authentic genuineness, genuine care for people, and the ability to want to make a difference. That's where empathy lies, really, is that kind of being aware of people's feelings, what's happening for them, but genuinely wanting to support that person. It's not about fixing it and taking it all away. It's around that person having a genuine interest in a person, being authentic, and then making a change. So there's different ways we can do that. Empathy, I guess some people are more naturally empathic than others, but it's about learning how to have those conversations about well-being, and I think for where I see success in organisations is where the well-being conversation is a kind of a normal conversation. So it's not just about when things are difficult or that person's taken some time off, or we know it's a significant event. It's about, for me, from my experience, managers knowing what's typical for their team members, really getting to know their team members, so there is an openness in dialogue, and that there is a genuine care for your team, and that comes across in those things. But those wellbeing conversations should be a regular thing, not a a monthly appointment in the diary, where everyone's preparing for it and what should I say, what shouldn't I say. There should be an aspect of how are you doing, and genuinely how are you throughout.
Totally agree. And it's interesting, isn't it, because it's having just that regular conversation helps you to be more comfortable with it over time, if it's not something that comes naturally. And also it shouldn't be reserved for the point of crisis. It's about building those relationships so that if there is a point of crisis, people feel comfortable kind of reaching out to you for support. So I know one of the other kind of things we wanted to explore today was around resilience, because I think this is kind of one of those things that can mean different things to different people, and sometimes it can always be one of those words that's kind of thrown out quite flippantly. Oh, you need to be more resilient, that will kind of fix all of your problems. And I just wonder, Kate, is there sort of a more clinical definition of resilience and how it plays into kind of our mental health and well-being? And does the definition kind of change if we're thinking about it on an individual basis versus the resilience of the whole team, for example? I'd love to know your thoughts.
And again, I'm talking from my experience as an occupational therapist, and this is my view, but I think resilience can mean lots of things to different people. And so I don't want to give just one, like this is the definition, because that isn't the case. It needs to encompass lots of different things. I think there's a bit of a consensus about it being around the way that people recover from and cope with the challenges, the setbacks, the difficulties, the disappointments, things like that, how we cope with them, and then how we can kind of bounce back from the things that happen in work life, home life, different aspects of our life. And I'm really interested in what you said then, Lucy, about the comment that you need to be more resilient. And I think for me, what happens there is that quite often resilience is expected in situations where it might be quite unrealistic or not reasonable. So depending on the situation, the workload, maybe the work environment, what's happening in somebody's personal life, and if somebody is perceived as not resilient, it's kind of viewed as they're not good enough or they're failing. There's a failing about that person, and actually, quite often with those things, it's a natural response to what is going on, and what I find is it's usually quite understandable that that person may appear as not resilient, but it is far deeper than that. And I do think when people are seen as resilient people, they get more status, kudos, they're respected more. Whereas quite often what we don't know is what's going on behind for somebody and what actually may be contributing to that. So for me, there's something really important there, and is understanding why some people might be more resilient than others. But also, I think, in my experience, resilience is fluid. It can change. There can be times in life when we're more able to be resilient than others. But also, it's about the reasonable expectations, the self-awareness, and some kindness can really support somebody in developing that resilience.
Yeah, it comes back to that empathy we were talking about earlier, and thinking about, what is it more broadly that might be going on with somebody that
Yeah.
might mean they're, less resilient than perhaps they once were.
Yeah.
And on that note, I would love to get your thoughts on this because, as you know, kind of SHL do all sorts of different assessments. And we looked at some of the data from our personality assessments, where we do measure some specific traits that kind of scientifically we believe make up resilience. And we compared some of those results pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, and sort of as you might expect, we found that there was a real dip in the traits that made up resilience post-pandemic. It was almost, to your point, I think there was just this universal, eroding of resilience because we've been in a challenging situation for such a long time. And I remember reading quite a few really interesting articles around, individuals' mental health being, having people who had never really thought about their mental health before, had never had to really think about it. And then for the first time during the pandemic were really, really tested, as opposed to individuals who had thought about their mental health before, knowing, okay, this is a tricky time and I know how to address this because I've been through tricky times before and I've got some of the tools to cope and recover, as opposed to people who didn't, and it was like, what is this that I'm feeling? I don't know what to do. And I can see some really interesting comments coming through on the chat as well. Lots of people agreeing resilience is fluid.
Yeah.
And Rowena shared, resilience is finite, like willpower. We can't keep it up forever. So, yeah, I would just love to know your thoughts on, that ebb and flow of resilience. And I guess taking on Rowena's sort of analogy, what can we do to keep it up when we feel it going down? What is it that individuals can do to build their resilience back up?
Sure. Yeah, I think just linking to what you said about the pandemic, what we found through the pandemic was many people experienced trauma in different ways. And when we experience trauma, that kind of impact on our resilience. And actually, it's really natural for people to struggle and to have find their resilience isn't quite the same as to what level it would normally be when we have experienced those traumatic events. So personality traits may factor in some of that, but really, I think most people did experience some trauma, and that is likely to have long-term impacts on people, and that trauma can be in many, many different ways. I think it's also about considering different people's life experiences, their personal work experience, and maybe, as you say, their resilience hasn't particularly been challenged previously, whereas there was something that happened then, or post, because what we're finding now is that as we are, we're moving away from that period of time, and having to adjust and adapt, there are so many long-term, particularly mental health impacts for people, and whether that may be for people's relatives, for their children, for themselves. We really need to acknowledge that, because just because it's over, if you like, it doesn't feel that to me, but we've got to consider the long-term impacts for people, which may not be as obvious as the stuff we were considering when we were in it. So I also believe that there's something in terms of resilience about the internal factors as well as the external factors. So there's something about belief, there's something about our perspective around resilience, or how much power we feel we have over our resilience will impact how resilient we are. So if we believe we've got some power and control, and actually we can find the skills and the tools to do this, we're more likely to be able to build our resilience, which kind of connects, and that's what some of resilience is about. If we're waiting for external factors, for other things to come into place before we can kind of rebuild and improve our resilience, then that's going to take longer, and that's less likely to happen. So there's something about our own internal beliefs, I think, that will really help us. And just linking to what Rowena said there, or is it around we can't keep it up forever. Because of the fluidity that we've kind of identified, it's almost like training a muscle. It's kind of, I see it as a bit like fitness. There are things we have to do or need to do to keep up our resilience, to notice when we're perhaps feeling less resilient, what it is about that. And sometimes being kind to ourselves to say that's totally understandable. Look at the situation, look at the different things that have happened, that makes sense. But I think if we can claw back the control where we can, where does my control lie? So what can I do about this will really help people to start to build that resilience. So it is something you can work on. It is something like fitness. You can work on it. But there are times, as Rowena quite rightly points out, the battery level drops, if you want to view it a bit like that, when the sort of power's going down. And I always encourage people to do something before it gets to the red. If you notice your levels are dropping or things feel a bit more difficult, we've all got our own signs. We've got our own signs of what means we're perhaps a bit less resilient. So the self-awareness is crucial for individuals I'm talking about here. So in terms of what we can do, there are many ways that we can build resilience. And I think sometimes people think they just need to put up with things, they need to get on with it when life's difficult. We need to be stoic or figure it out on my own. That's the best way I can do it. And what I'd really love to say to people is that reaching out for support and recognizing when we need some help or support is a key part of being resilient. It's really important. So being able to recognize where your limitations are, or and proactively seeking support, either to talk things through or delegate or ask for some help to prioritize. The connection with other people can really help to build our own resilience. So I'm going to run through a few things, if that's okay, because I believe it's a really personal thing. I think you have to find your own toolkit, create your own strategies that work for you. So it is things like making connections with people, positive connections with work colleagues, friends, family, social life. Having some positive connections with others can help our resilience. Learning from others, having those conversations be really helpful. I often find when people are having a tough time, if they're going through some difficulties, a lot of the people that I work with tend to withdraw. They isolate themselves. They feel they need to get on with it by themselves, feel like they're failing if they reach out, or feel it's a weakness. And what we do know is that the more that people can find that courage within themselves, it takes a bit of bravery sometimes to do it, and also have people that you trust to reach out to. So again, it's not about blaming the person if they're struggling to reach out, but it is about maybe somebody's noticing something and then reaching out to them. So the positive connections, having conversations with people, being aware if you're starting to withdraw and maybe doing something about that, noticing you're doing it, self-awareness. Absolutely something about taking breaks, giving your self-time for rest and recovery will help to build resilience. But the other two key points I wanted to talk about, one was around mindfulness and being more mindful. I'm a big advocate of mindfulness, and I know it's not for everybody, and that's okay. But I do think there's some real power in learning to be present, feeling like you have more control over what you're thinking, and knowing how to manage the difficult thoughts can really, again, help to build your own personal resilience, so that we're not dwelling too much on the past or the future. We can always plan, we can reflect on things, but it's when those thoughts are kind of taking over when we don't want them to. So having some skills in mindfulness, having some practice to use, and where we can, trying to develop some kind of positive outlook can be really useful. So as I say, I know these things are a challenge for people at times, and especially when we are faced with difficulties in life. The other, sorry, go on, Lucy.
No, I was just gonna say, I was just reflecting on that sort of list or toolkit, which I loved, and I was just thinking about how these could look different for different people. So it's interesting. So we've got self-awareness, positive
Yep.
connections, asking for help, taking breaks, mindfulness. I would love if people felt comfortable if in the chat you might want to bring to life what some of those look like for you. I know for me, taking a break for me looks like going to netball training, because that is like a place where, and I'm also very much in the present. You're forced to, I'm not thinking about next week. I'm not thinking about this meeting or an email that I had at work. I'm really focused on what is happening now, and I can't concentrate on anything else. And then obviously all the lovely endorphins of exercise and all of that good stuff. So, but I'm think for some people taking a break could be a bubble bath or reading a book. And I think what's nice about these different things you've shared with us is you can really personalize those. So,
Mhm.
building positive connections, that could be, a dinner out with your friends and remembering to sort of make time for that. So
Yeah.
I would love to hear what other people do kind of under those categories in the chat, because it might be nice to sort of learn some things from each other on the call as well. In just going back to the self-awareness,
Hmm.
one of the things that I have, and I think, Kate, it was from one of the sessions you did, was just being aware of what my inner voice is telling me, and almost thinking, is this something I would say to a friend or a colleague who was in the situation as me? And almost sometimes I think we're our own harshest critics. And I would love to hear your thoughts on like how you almost separate that inner voice from kind of reality, and the important, and how that can help with self-awareness as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So for many people, their inner voice is quite critical. It's quite judgmental. It's not necessarily kind. So what I would say, it starts with awareness. It starts with noticing what are you saying to yourself in your mind. What are the thoughts? Are you your cheerleader and you're giving yourself praise and you're supporting yourself as you go through, or are there some kind of negative commentary happening in the background? And it's really common. I hear that from lots of people, that they could be quite self-deprecating, quite unkind about themselves, to themselves, internally. And just picking up on what you said there, Lucy, yeah, one of the things I say is when you start to notice how you're talking to yourself internally, just pause and think about what those words are. You could even write them down or say them out loud. And that can be really powerful in noticing the tone of it, noticing the different ways that we talk to ourselves, and then asking yourself the question, would you think or say this about a friend or a colleague? Or, and if you wouldn't, why wouldn't you? And for most people, they say to me, because it's really unkind, like it's horrible. And so then they start to question that a bit. So there are, that's an ongoing thing. And I think with a lot of the techniques I talk about, it is about practice. They're not things you do it once and all of a sudden, my resilience is there. There's definitely practice. It takes time with these different skills. But yeah, as I say, for me, the first step is noticing. Notice your inner voice. And if it's really kind to you, great, lovely, keep going. If it's not, then thinking about, okay, pause for a moment. One thing I'd like to say is that a huge chunk of what we think isn't true, and particularly around the negative side of things, the worrying thoughts, I won't be able to do that, you're not good enough, a lot of those kind of thoughts, the negative thoughts that come in, or the fears about what's going to happen, particularly fears about the future. I was having lots of these myself earlier before coming on this LinkedIn live, like it's not going to be good enough, and these kind of things. And so what I do is I tell myself it's just a thought, it's not a fact. And that's the crucial bit. When we believe our thought, because we naturally believe them, but actually so many of our thoughts are not true. So questioning it, is this a thought? Is it a fact? Most of the time it's not. It's a worrying thought. And just creating that separation of it. Okay, this is just a mental event that's happened in my head. I don't need to believe it. And then trying to replace it with something a bit kinder, a bit nicer.
Yeah. And I think there's sometimes a bit of a misconception as well that, you know, resilience is something we either have or we don't, or people are very naturally resilient or they're not. And actually, all of these little things we've talked about over the last kind of 10-15 minutes are the building little things that are well within our control to do and start doing, which can lead to resilience. So it's just not, it's not the case that if you don't have it, you'll never have it. And I think that's quite important as well.
No.
Rowena has shared with us that something that really takes all your mental focus, and she said she's fallen in love with knitting because she's so bad at it, she has to concentrate fully.
And I mean, no, I call it flow. Like when you're in the flow of something, when nothing else matters, that's really helpful to us in creating, like you say, the endorphins, the good feelings. That, you know, productivity is really helpful, but in a measured way, in a way that's support, it doesn't become stressful or an extra pressure. But some creativity can be really useful. But yeah, focus on something. Again, that's where mindfulness comes in. Like you can choose where you're going to focus your attention, and that's the mindfulness practices that help us to do that.
Exactly. And you know, Beatrice has also shared with us, in terms of that inner voice, I have a tendency to always think I should do better. And I just, I loved that question you said, Kate, which was like, is this fact or is this just my thoughts? So I think being a bit kind of aware and critical of why am I saying these things to myself is definitely something that's really helped me in the past.
Just separate yourself a little bit from those thoughts. I think we sometimes think that our thoughts are us, but they're automatic. Some of those things are automatic, they're happening, and we don't have to believe them. We don't have to buy into them. And sometimes what we also do is the whole story happens, and what if this happens and that happens, and you know, and then they'll think this, and before we know it, we've lost our jobs before we know it in our heads. None of that's true. But it's just the way that our thinking patterns go. So if we can interrupt thinking a little bit earlier, put a technique in place to interrupt the thoughts, stop them from progressing further, that can be really helpful.
Yeah, and sometimes that can come into that other point. If you're not good at doing that yourself, in that asking for help and building those positive connections, and again, that could look different for different people. For some, it could be exploring those thoughts with a coach. For some, it could be with a therapist. For some, it could be with their friends, and even sometimes just saying them out loud to other people and hearing some of, you know, their responses helps you think, actually, you know, this isn't fact. These are just my thoughts.
Yeah, there's some really lovely self-help tools out there to do it as well. I highly recommend talking these things through with somebody else, but if you want to do some things on your own, towards the end, I can perhaps share a few of those.
Yeah, that would be great. So I guess moving on slightly from individuals and thinking about how organisations can support their employees to build resilience. What are the things that you see in terms of the companies you work with? What works well? What maybe doesn't work so well? What are the kind of learnings for organisations?
Yeah. So from an organisational perspective, I think there's something really powerful about having a bit like a toolbox of support, or a range of things, a range of different activities around well-being, building resilience, can help support all colleagues and all team members in that way. So things that address different aspects of well-being. So it could be things around social, emotional, financial well-being, lots of different things. So I think it's having choice, it's having consistency with what's offered as well, and all of that could be really helpful. I think, again, I want to come back to culture, because I think that's really important in ensuring that organisations are supporting people in the best possible way. So I will link back to the point I made around people being able to be their true selves at work. I think that makes a big difference. So not having to pretend or hide parts of ourselves, I guess, is the key thing, or feeling safe to be yourself at work. having compassion for people in the workplace and working towards a happy working environment can all help with resilience across the organisation. So I think if people feel safe and secure at work, and they're driven by security rather than being driven by threat, can really enable people to thrive. So that people aren't just surviving and getting through and turning up and doing their thing and going, but actually where people feel safe and secure will really make a difference. So having lots of choice, so that it can meet people's different needs and learning styles and all of those things. The key thing for me that I've found has worked most effectively is where senior leaders genuinely buy in to any kind of resilience, well-being initiatives, and it's coming from the top in a genuine way. So leading by example, I think, is fantastic. Modeling healthy working practices, attending those events that are put on, supporting staff, having the conversations, being a bit vulnerable, sharing those things. They're the bits that I've noticed absolutely land with people. They mean people connect, they feel supported, they feel like it's real.
Yeah.
And it needs to be, if it's going to be effective in any way.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree. And I think especially, as leaders, that role modeling those behaviors, because so often, I've seen so much research around kind of individual employee engagement, happiness, experience, so influenced by the role of the sort of immediate line manager. And I think sometimes we sort of forget to invest in that population in terms of upskilling them around, this type of thing. So I think really important population just for that day-to-day experience of actually what's it like when I show up to work and how do I feel about my work and my job.
Yeah, and as a leader, if that's not stuff that you're comfortable with or you haven't done previously, to just expect somebody in a management position or a leader of some sort to then be having wellbeing conversations with people or feel that they have the tools to be able to support somebody. I think it needs to be invested in. There needs to be not just training, but ongoing, consistent support for people, or working out what the best way is for that person. Because I think it's a lot of responsibility actually, and I think we can't just expect leaders to know how to do that. So there has to be some kind of support for them as well. And what I have heard recently is about leaders who are really compassionate and actually burning out because they are so supportive. They're taking on things. They're giving flexible working practices and supporting their teams and building resilience in their team. But for themselves, they are draining and they are losing all of their energy and power and control. And actually, that can be quite scary as well. That can be quite difficult for an organisation if you're not looking after your managers as well. Where do they go? Where does their support come from to enable them to support teams?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to just remind everybody to submit some questions. We would love to hear if there's something you would like some more advice on, any questions about what else could be in your kind of resilience toolkit, anything that's on your mind. Please do ask a question. And I will make sure we leave enough time for our kind of mindfulness exercise at the end as well. So whilst everyone's thinking of their questions, I have another question for you, Kate, around you've talked a bit about the importance of, really setting that culture and approaching this from a strategic point of view. I've definitely seen pushback around, I think when some organisations first started exploring this wellbeing place, you'd see things like Fruity Fridays and get more plants in the office and here's some gym memberships, which I think were on their own not bad ideas. But some of the challenge was, I don't really care about having fruit and a plant on my desk. I'm so overworked and stressed. This just isn't going to help it. This feels like a sticky plaster. So I guess how do organisations get that balance right in terms of focusing on things that are perhaps quite practical, versus also addressing the longer term underlying causes.
Yeah. It is a balance, and I think if it's addressing a few things really. One is if somebody's work role is completely unrealistic, not manageable, and actually, just unhealthy, then it's really unfair to expect that person to be resilient and be able to have appreciation for some of the things like the examples you gave there, Lucy. I think that can be quite unfair. So there is something about matching, workload and ensuring that people's workload is achievable, management that they can feel proud of the work that they do. And that it's working for them. So there's something about the genuinely around workload and skill mix and ensuring that people are doing jobs that are suited to their abilities. But apart from that, if that's kind of being led, I think I have seen organisations who use a very tick box approach to this, rather than being genuine, and that is met with cynicism amongst colleagues and a resistance sometimes to those things. So again, I'll come back to the deeper level of culture that, when those things happen and there were, if that's what's going on, this kind of individual, just the odd thing every now and again, then it isn't great for morale. And actually, what can happen then is sometimes it becomes a bit defensive, and a workplace will say, well, we've done these things, and then colleagues are blamed for not embracing them or being appreciative of those things. So I think it is the balance, and then I'll say the word again: consistency. There has to be a consistent, planned, strategic approach to it that encompasses some of the one-off things in there, but also some longer term support and strategies. So that could be around training and development and offering, helping people to understand their own mental health and well-being, for leaders to understand that as well, and for there to be, training and support across those things. I think the other things perhaps where organisations feel like they're doing something really positive but may get a bit of kickback from it are things like, so many organisations invest in an employee assistance programme, an EAP, and they can be really helpful. They can be really positive. It's usually instant access to some support, often from a counsellor, and that can be really useful for many people. I think what can be difficult is if that's the only thing that's available, and I'm not dismissing it. I'm saying, it definitely has its place, but then for an individual who perhaps needs something a little bit more in depth, or they don't feel comfortable talking on the phone or online, what are the alternatives for that person then? Because that can be really disheartening if you've reached out to something and it really isn't what's going to be helpful for you, or what needs to happen is much more long term. Then I think that could be just, so again, coming back to that range of different supports available is very helpful. The other key thing I really want to impress is about the voice. So it's about the voice of the organisation. So how are organisations checking in with their colleagues, with their employees, as to what would be helpful? How can we do this better, and what would be useful to you? So yes, the Fruity Fridays may be there. However, people may come back. So I think it's really important that employees have a voice in the kind of well-being, mental health, resilience piece of the organisation, and that people are willing to listen to that and act on it. So that's where it kind of really comes together. That collaboration, that kind of whole organisation approach really works for people. And again, that kind of genuine buy-in from leadership to ensure that across all levels of the organisation and all parts of it, there's support, and that there's a genuine interest in the well-being of people who work there.
Yeah, totally agree. We've had some questions come in. Okay. So yeah, please do send questions in. We've probably got time for another one or two. And Rowena, you never have to apologise for spamming the chat, because I think this is a really interesting question. So she said, so specifically in the UK, I know we've had this big trial around, lots of organisations trialling 4-day weeks.
Yeah.
I think, if my memory of the trial is right, people were still paid full-time 5-day-a-week hours, but they were doing their work in 4 days. And I think we've we've heard a lot about whether companies still as profitable, were they still productive, could their business still work? But actually, I haven't heard anything on what's that done for those employees' well-being. Has it made them more resilient? So I don't know if you've seen anything on that. Would love to know your thoughts.
I can comment on a couple of cases I know around it. And so again, it is everybody's individual experience. For some people, that 4-day working week is brilliant. It works really well. It enables them to have more space for their own kind of personal development, their life outside of work, and it fits really well. What we find in many workplaces is that when people work 4 days, they fit their hours of 5 days into the 4 days, and that can work for some, but for others it can be like a pressure to have to do longer working days, which can then be a cause of stress if that impacts on your life outside of work. Or if if there's I don't know, say we say a 9 to 5 is a typical working day. If it's a 9 to 5 for 4 days a week, then that can work really well for people, but it's where it's not possible to do that if that's what they've kind of signed up to do. I think for some people, they prefer the spread. And again, it's so individual. These things are so individual that it is really hard, I think, for workplaces to meet everybody's needs, because if everybody goes to that 4-day working week, for some it'll be brilliant, for others it'll be a real cause of stress and not work. So it is about hearing people, and I think the best kind of examples I hear are the flexible working hours, where it's possible. And obviously, an organization has to be productive and it's got to work from a business point of view as well. But the flexible working hours I hear are going really well in many different places. And it's about, again, if your culture's right, if people are supportive of each other and can positively work in that way, then I do know people who do kind of maybe, so for example, with a young family, do a school drop off, a school pickup, work in between the drop-offs and pickups, and then perhaps do a couple of hours once children have gone to bed. Still do their working hours, but it works really well for them. So I'm cautious to say that the 4-day working week can really help in terms of people being more resilient. Of course, it can for some people, absolutely, because it gives you that space to have those connections, to do the activities that boost your well-being, to have time to think and to get a balance in life. But for other people, it doesn't work, and doesn't fit into their pattern.
And I think that's when there's also a difference between if there's just a couple of individuals on a team who are doing a 4-day week as opposed to the whole team, and then how that kind of fits in as well. So I think there's going to be more interesting stuff coming out of this space. I know when the UK government did that kind of big experiment, and there were a few companies who said, no, we're going to stop. This wasn't for us. And quite a few at the time were like, well, no, we're going to keep this going. We've actually seen people be more productive. It's, we were skeptical, but it's worked. And I'm really curious to see what comes out next, almost a few months on. Are those companies who said they were going to keep it up still doing it? Has anyone else tried it? I think it's fascinating. So I guess I'm mindful that I want to leave up some time for mindfulness at the end, but I suppose just one last question, selfishly, Kate, from me. I'd love to know what advice you'd give to kind of going back to people on an individual basis as we are coming up towards, I guess, quarter end and then end of the year. I know lots of people in organizations will be pushing to meet kind of year-end targets. There's always a bit of busyness. When we're in the midst of that kind of busy work period, I think it can be so easy to get drawn into the day-to-day, forget to build all of the good habits that we know can kind of lead to our well-being, to our resilience. So in those times of stress, what would your advice be for kind of individuals to, I suppose, not get completely sucked into just surviving the day-to-day?
And we see that, don't we? The going into the winter can be really challenging for people. Okay, I'm going to give you a technique you can use, or a theory that I use quite a lot in the practice that I do, and I use it myself. And it's called the 3 Ps, and they are pacing, planning, and prioritizing. And so the idea behind that being, so sorry, I'll start with planning. So I think planning is really important in terms of your day to day. And in terms of, so what I would do is prioritize the things that are your non-negotiables. And they need to be the things that help you, that help you to stay well. So maybe starting off when you're planning with, where are your breaks going to be today on a daily, on a daily basis? Where are my breaks today? So that we prioritize those things. Or across your week, Lucy, where's your netball training coming in? And putting that in first before you then start to plan in the other things you start to do. If we go into a day without a plan, anything can happen. Okay, but if we start with a plan of, this is what's happening when, and maybe some of it's out of your control because you've got things in your diary and commitments, but really thinking about, what is the stuff that helps me? Lift your head up a little bit and go, right, when I go, what have I done in the past that I don't want to do again? And how am I going to do that? So plan each day or week, prioritize putting the things that are really important first. I call them non-negotiables, but put in your non-negotiables first and then put other things around it. And then pace yourself. I work with so many people who do a bit of a boom and bust type thing, like go, fill it all up, really, really busy, and then crash. And that could be your weekends, that some people get to the weekend and they just crash. Just recover, back in Monday morning, go. So really encouraging people to pace things at a sensible rate. I know for me, for kind of, when I might have a to-do list, and I like a list, so I write a list. What I also do with my list is put really clearly how long roughly I think that thing is going to take, so that when I'm planning, I'm realistic in my planning. So I'm not putting too much in there that's actually, I'm never going to achieve that. And then I feel rubbish about myself and I tell myself I'm not good enough and I failed today. So we're planning in, okay, that's going to take an hour, so let's put that in where there's an hour space. Or actually today I'm not going to be able to do that because I haven't got an hour space to do it. So to be kind to yourselves, I'd say, and yeah, 3 Ps: plan, pace, and prioritize what you do.
Thank you. I love that. Also, if you're anything like me with to-do lists, you write something on it you've already done, so you can get the endorphins of crossing it off. And I think the other thing I've sort of learned over the years as well, when it comes to that planning piece, is there are some bits of work that I need to give myself time to be in the right headspace, to have that kind of deep thinking and not just be doing it on the fly. And I can't do it off the back of 3 back-to-back meetings just before it. So thinking about that in the planning has really helped me as well. Well, listen, I don't want to make people late and therefore stressed for their next meeting. So, Kate, I would absolutely love it if you could finish us off with a mindfulness exercise, and then we will share some details as well at the end around, we'd love your feedback on this session, to let us know helpful, what inform what future sessions might be. And you'll also have a chance to see all of Kate's contact details as well. So Kate, if you could lead us in the mindfulness, that would be lovely.
Absolutely. So yeah, we thought it would be nice to end on something that hopefully re-energizes people and gives you a bit of breathing space before you go into whatever you're doing after this. So the mindful part of it for me is that I'm going to ask you all to turn things off just for a moment. So maybe turn your phone over, turn off your notifications just for 5 minutes, so that you're not disturbed as far as possible, and to really focus on what we're doing right here, right now. So to be really present with what we're doing. So yeah, stop replying to those emails, multitasking, and just be here right now. Okay. So I'm going to just do a breathing exercise with you, and I want you to really focus on your breath as we do this and try to bring all of your attention there. Yeah, your thoughts will pop in and pop out, let them go, and then guide yourself back here. Okay, so I'm going to start by asking you to just breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth to start with. And I want you to try and make the out breath longer than the in breath. Okay, so just breathing in and out, making the out breath longer than the in breath. And then to give you a tool to help you with this is I want you to focus on a rectangle. So you can open your eyes if you want to, or visualize a rectangle in your mind's eye. So that could be visualizing a picture that brings you happiness, something that makes you feel good. Or if you're in a room right now, you want to look around, find a window, door. If you're on a screen, you can use a screen. Okay, and so to help us with the out breath being longer than the in breath, I want you to look along the rectangle and breathe in as you look along the short side. Breathe out as your eyes move along the longer side. Breathe in on the short side and out as you go along the long side. So we're going around the rectangle. I'm going to ask you to just do that 3 times. If you start to feel a bit dizzy, lightheaded, stop, just pause. I'm going to ask you to do 3 rectangle breaths in your own time. And when we have control of our breath and we're focusing on our breath, as we do it, we're triggering calming systems in our body that really help us to regulate any feelings of overwhelm or worry or panic about things. And this is a really useful tool you can use anywhere, anytime. I challenge you to find a time when there's not a rectangle around you, whether you have your phone or whether you're out and about somewhere. There is likely to be, if it's a fence panel in a field, a gate somewhere, there is likely to be a rectangle. So if you're, what I would say, I use this in between things. So sometimes in between meetings, before something. Sometimes I'll use it during, and nobody can see what I'm doing because I'm just slowly just regulating myself. Or if you just need to regain some focus. And I think sometimes when we go from one thing to the next and we rush through life, it can be hard to find ways to calm ourselves. So our breath is our superpower. And if you can practice, I'll say it again, practice things, until this becomes a natural thing that you can do, and you can just bring it in whenever you want to. Just maybe tonight, maybe find some time to practice a rectangle breath.
Thank you so much, Kate. I could definitely feel that working as I was doing it. And, for those of you interested, there's so much interesting kind of science behind the importance of mindfulness breathing. So thank you all for joining us for the LinkedIn today. I'm hoping up on the screen shortly you'll see a couple of QR codes around just giving us some feedback on the session today, and also how you can get in touch with Kate, who's obviously also on LinkedIn, so you can please do connect with her there. It's been a really, really great, insightful session. Thank you for your interaction. Thank you for your questions. Really great session. Thank you, Kate, so much for joining us. I'm going to be thinking about my 3 Ps. I'm going to be thinking about my rectangle breathing, and I'm going to be thinking about what other things that are in my resilience toolkit, and how can I make sure that I've got them to draw on and prioritize them. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.